this is Akhtar and welcome to episode 10 of our Digimon Tamers Review series. For the big 1-0 in this episode, we'll be taking a look at the US Digivolving Impmon to Beelzemon Blast Mode Figure. Impmon is my absolute favorite character from the show. His character arc is simply phenomenal. Not only is it well built up, morally complex and woven seamlessly into the main plot, the payoff and catharsis is just beyond brilliant. Because of how amazing the character is, it's not surprising that a figure of him was also released in the Japanese line as well, a line that only consisted of 4 figures. As great of an endorsement of the character as that is, as we'll soon see, this is one of the rare cases where the US version of the figure far exceeds the quality of the Japanese version, at least in Beelzemon mode. In Impmon mode, however, they each have their pros and cons. The US version is far better proportioned with regard to the size of the head relative to the rest of the body. The arms, while small, don't extend from the sides of his head, unlike the Japanese version. The arms of the Japanese version are also comically oversized, while the body and legs look drastically undersized when compared to the head. Though I have to admit, they did an excellent job with the Impmon head sculpt. It's far more fully realized in 3 dimensions, and the ears actually have volume. In addition, the ears are used to store Beelzemon's 2 guns in Impmon mode. This is unlike the US version, which has absolutely no room to store its 2 accessories, Beelzemon's gun and blaster, but more on these accessories later. In terms of kibble, while the US version definitely looks better from the front, with only its 2 feet clearly being Beelzemon's boots, from the back, the Japanese version's the clear winner. This is just really sad, but credit where credit is due, they actually bothered to give him his tail. Not to mention, he at least looks good from one angle, which is way more than can be said for a number of other Digivolving figures. As for articulation, the Japanese version once again manages to score a win, as the US version only has ball-jointed arms and swiveling feet. Interestingly enough, neither version has a smiley face on their chest painted in, so when it comes to the Impmon mode, it's a really close call. However, once you see their respective Beelzemon modes, I think you would agree with me that the US version is the clear winner. Now on to one of the most badass Digivolving scenes in Digimon history. We first start by disconnecting the wings from the sides of Impmon's head, unpack Impmon's ears and tail, and leave them off to the side. Take Impmon's face and split it apart to become Beelzemon's wings. We flip out the wingtips to complete the wings. Grab onto Beelzemon's head and extend both his neck and waist. Pull down his feet and rotate them around. Swivel Beelzemon's shins around and peg them into place. The gun holster gets pushed off the side on these tracks. Swivel his toes around and fold them up to become Beelzemon's boot spikes. We finish up Beelzemon's legs by storing Impmon's arms in the thighs. We extend Beelzemon's arms and peg them into place. And last but not least, we take Impmon's ears and peg them into Beelzemon's back to become his second pair of wings. I'm sorry, but there's really no contest. What is up with the Japanese version? The wings look terrible, the proportions are all wrong, and the head sculpt is just ugh! That's what happens when you try to use die-cast for parts that don't need to be made out of die-cast. His forearm guards are also made out of die-cast, but who really gives a shit when the US version is pretty much perfect? The proportions are pretty much spot on, the detailing superb, the wings are actually shaped like wings, and oh yeah, speaking of wings, did I mention they gave him his second pair of wings? They gave him his second pair of wings! Yeah, it requires platforming, and yeah, they sacrificed Impmon's ears to do it, but what's the alternative? As evidenced by the Japanese version, a gigantic chunk of kibble on the back of the figure that makes balancing it nigh impossible. The US version also shares the Impmon face and body on the back as kibble, but just look how well it's managed. Yes, as previously mentioned, the Japanese version can store the two guns in the ears, but it's just not worth the sacrifice. Not only is this storage method in lieu of any show-accurate storage in Beelzemon mode, Beelzemon Blast Mode does not use two guns, and they didn't include his signature blaster that his mode is named after. What the hell? On the other hand, the US version gives you the gun and blaster. The blaster, which has an openable barrel, attaches securely to his right hand, and the gun can be held in his left. On top of that, and on top of all of that, they even made sure to give him a holster which he can use to store his gun. The only thing that the Japanese version excels in is articulation. As for the US version, aside from the wings and tail, which are articulated up the wazoo, only his arms have any kind of real posability. Even so, they can only move forwards and backwards, bends at the elbow, and swivel at the forearm and the wrist. You can technically split the legs apart, but the figure is constructed in a way where the leg joints don't have the same amount of movement, meaning to say that he'll always be leaning to one side. And finally, just like in Impmon mode, the feet are on ball joints, but this actually causes problems for the figure. For you see, while his arms are capable of holding up his blaster, it causes the figure to become horrendously unbalanced. As his legs have zero posability, the only way to counter this is by leaning him back. But that just doesn't look very intimidating, does it? Also, due to the transformation, the arms detach really easily at the shoulders, so as good as he looks, he's more of a static display piece, which may or may not be a deal breaker for some. In conclusion, I never thought I'd say this in one of my reviews, but the US version is the clear winner in almost every regard. While the US version arguably has a slightly weaker Impmon mode, the Bandai of America designers knew where their priorities lay. Despite the lack of posability, it does pretty much everything else right. For one, at the most basic level, it's a proper representation of Beelzemon's Blast Mode, which the Japanese version couldn't even get right. So until they get round to releasing that Digivolving Spirits figure, which is probably never, do one of the best Digimon characters justice on the shelf by picking up this figure today. So, this is Zach saying, see you guys in the next episode of our Digimon Tamers series of reviews.